And we really came to that conclusion, like, okay, if we think of this as a country and we think it's going to be a country with a big GDP and a big economy, there are people who are working on banking and there are people who are working on payments. But, life insurance, that's like 2-3% of global GDP. It plays a really critical role in people's financial lives. Like, I know it sounds like boring or morbid or whatever, but like these are some of the oldest savings products in the world. What happens to my loved ones or my family if I die before I'm supposed to?
Hey everybody, Tanner here with WAGMI Ventures. On today's episode, we have Zach Townsend, co-founder and CEO at Meanwhile. For anyone who's new, this is the WAGMI Ventures podcast where we do snapshots with interesting builders, founders, and investors from across Web3. Check out wagmiventures.io to learn more about the syndicate behind the podcast. But for now, let's get into it with Zach at Meanwhile. All right. Hey, everybody. This is the WAGMI Ventures podcast. I'm here today with Zach Townsend, who's the co-founder and CEO at Meanwhile. Zach, how are you doing today? What's up?
I'm great. Happy to be here, Tanner.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming on the show. I think Meanwhile is fascinating, so I know we have a ton of good stuff to talk about here. But before we talk about Meanwhile, I would love to jump in to learn a little bit more about you, because you've had this kind of fascinating professional life so far. In reverse order, from my understanding, it's before Meanwhile, you were a McKinsey associate partner. Before that, the chief data officer for the state of California. Before that, co-founder at Standard Treasury. And then before that, CTO of the city of Newark. So amidst all of that, I think my main question doing a little research was like, okay, how did this interest in Bitcoin and crypto come about during this kind of fascinating, I have to imagine, very involved journey? I'm curious if we could start there.
Yeah, I think it starts actually even before that. I was raised by a single dad. My dad raised me, and I was fortunate to test into a really fancy high school. And we did not have the greatest financial position. So we applied for some government programs, and I got free school lunch and stuff. And that really led me to thinking a lot about financial inclusion and financial empowerment. And then I go on, why are these forms difficult? Why is the financial system the way it is? And then I guess I'm fortunate to go on to a really fancy college. And I end up working in Newark for Cory Booker as the head of innovation. I'm just very interested in improving government services, really at the nitty gritty level of people getting, again, filling out forms and dealing with government offices and stuff like that. And I was fortunate enough to work on financial inclusion in Newark, which was even more, I guess, intense than my personal experience. Was why do people use check cashing? Why are people unbanked? And all these issues. And so I think the thread line here is that interest in financial inclusion, financial empowerment, fixing a financial system. Yeah, and also I'd be lying if the 2008 financial crisis, which I graduated from college into, did not play a role in that thinking as well. So for me, crypto has for a really long time been through that lens and thinking about digital money and access to money and it as a mechanism or a means to create more fair and just financial systems. And although my, I guess, professional career has until this company been starting Standard Treasury, which was a fintech startup that built sort of banking APIs and banking infrastructure, all the way to McKinsey, where I was working mostly for larger companies, but very much so in this practice of building new business units inside our clients, again, with an aim toward more financial access. So that career might not appear to have a lot of crypto, but I think or Bitcoin, but in the background, really since 2013, 14, 15, I think a lot of people, I've been paying a lot of attention, have been fortunately dollar cost averaging the purchase of Bitcoin, and saw it as a way to build the financial future that I want to exist.
Love it. Okay. So I'd love to maybe connect these dots to Meanwhile then. So maybe starting with a question that I was curious about, which is, I have to imagine you had an interesting vantage point looking at what you could work on, right? And so I'm curious, how did you land on conviction that this was the right opportunity for you to invest your energy into? And maybe we can start talking about Meanwhile through that lens.
Yeah. Yeah, it really started with two core beliefs. So the first is my co-founder and I are both, as I said, care a lot about these like global financial inclusion, financial empowerment issues. But our background is more in traditional fintech. And so we started the business in early 2022. We started thinking about it in late 2021. And one of our firm beliefs was that the value in crypto land or Bitcoin land is going to accrue to people who can deal with all the regulatory BS. And we looked out, and this was, I guess, counterintuitive at the time, or didn't, not as popular as it is now. But we were like, okay, we think for the next 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, like we want to build a regulated financial entity and like deal with that pain. And like we think we're particularly good and adept at dealing with that pain. So that's sort of like why regulated business in crypto. And then the second thing is we really had a core belief that Bitcoin in particular, but again, crypto more broadly, like we should stop thinking about it as like assets you buy and like start thinking about it as like a country we want to live in. And when you look out 30, 40, 50 years, there's going to be this global, like decentralized country. And I'll just call crypto land or BTC land. And when you start thinking about it through that lens, we started to write down a list of like, what are the financial institutions that like every country has? And we happen to have in our past also thought about life insurance a little bit. And we really came to that conclusion, like, okay, if we think of this as a country and we think it's going to be a country with a big GDP and a big economy, there are people who are working on banking and there are people who are working on payments. Life insurance, that's like 2-3% of global GDP. It plays a really critical role in people's financial lives. Like, I know it sounds like boring or morbid or whatever, but like these are some of the oldest savings products in the world. Like what happens to my loved ones or my family if I die before I'm supposed to? Like that's life insurance. And actually an annuity is the opposite. Like what happens to my loved ones, my family, if I live longer than I'm supposed to? And these are like really core financial services. And then the other side, we don't think a lot about it, but like the office buildings you see are frequently owned by life insurance companies, like a form of permanent capital. They're a form of long-term capital. They buy a lot of the mortgages in the world. They buy a lot of like highways and infrastructure because they have a long time horizons because they're insuring people like for, again, 30, 40, 50 years. And that's how long they think about the assets they buy. So we just thought that was, I mean, I wish I had some like really pointed comment, but like, it's just like the type of idea that we like kept waking up and thinking about it and learning more about it and being more curious and talking to users and getting interesting feedback. And that sort of snowballed into starting the business. So I wouldn't have said I was like, if you asked me 3 years ago that I was going to spend the rest of my life working on life insurance. But now when you combine like crypto, you combine this like core financial service, you combine the long-term asset management, I get to work on so many different things. And I really think this could be one of the like most important and durable institutions that gets created this century. And or that's what I hope. That's what I'm trying to build.
I love that. Yeah, I think it's fascinating, just the confluence of things you guys were thinking about, but also some of the trends that kind of make Meanwhile make a lot of sense, I think, to anyone listening. Hey everybody, quick thing here. We're excited to announce WAGMI Advisory, your home for all things fundraising, hiring, and partnerships. This is all about supercharging your project with the WAGMI network consisting of over 20,000 executives, investors, and builders in crypto, all ready to come alongside your project to help it succeed. Get in touch at team@wagmiventures.io to learn more and figure out if WAGMI Advisory is the right fit for your project. Now, let's get back to the show. So I'm curious then, in your own words, how would you describe or explain what Meanwhile is and what it enables?
Yeah, so look, I'll answer that in two ways. The first is like big picture vision. The second is just like really micro what we do today. So the big picture vision is like there are 57 countries in the world right now with inflation rates over 10%. We think that if you're living in one of those countries and you're buying life insurance, that like maybe you should buy life insurance in Bitcoin. That might make a lot more sense. So we really see this as in the long term as a global play. We think that digital money is like a transformative technology to reaching a lot more people with a core financial service. How we do that today is we've built a company in Bermuda, and let me just pause and say Bermuda is not the Bahamas, sometimes, which is where FTX is. Bermuda is its own country. It's like the insurance capital of the world. If you walk around Hamilton, which is the big town in Bermuda, it's like all these big insurance and reinsurance companies. It's like the island, literally half the people on the island, they're like actuaries and accountants and lawyers. And it's also become a real crypto hub. So Coinbase has their offshore operations there, their offshore exchange. Square Cash has a license there for offshore crypto stuff. So we got licensed there. And what we have is we have a full life insurance company. We're running a life insurance company. And what's unique about that company is it is entirely denominated in Bitcoin. So what that means is that our users, they pay their premiums, they buy their policies in Bitcoin. So they pay us in Bitcoin. And we also make our promises, our payouts, the guarantees we make, those are all also in Bitcoin. And then everything in the company also operates denominated in Bitcoin. So we state our financials in Bitcoin. We do our regulatory solvency calculations in Bitcoin. We keep everything in Bitcoin. And what's nice about that is that we don't have to worry, and our users don't have to worry about what I like to call the dollar Bitcoin exchange rate. I don't like to say the price of Bitcoin, the exchange rate of Bitcoin. And so we have this company, because people pay us in Bitcoin, we make the promises in Bitcoin. If Bitcoin, over the course of running this company, it's been at 60,000, 15 or 16,000, 25,000, now 38,000. It doesn't, our balance sheet has just stayed the same that entire time, right? We have capital, people pay us, we pay out, and all of that, we get to, all of the day-to-day, week-to-week, month-to-month, even year-to-year prices of Bitcoin, we get to tune out and say that doesn't really matter for a company. And then with that, our first product is this really simple product. It's called Whole Life. And basically, it's well named. And it's called Whole Life because it lasts your whole life. So the way our product works is you might pay 1 Bitcoin a year for 10 years. You basically only pay, you can prepay, but you only pay for 10 years. So you pay 1 Bitcoin a year for 10 years, and then we promise you some number. Depends how old you are and your sex and whether you smoke or not, but you might pay us 10 and we'll pay out 18 or 20 or something like that. And so that's at the heart of it, that's the product. You pay us 10, we promise your beneficiaries 20. But what's nice about that is a couple things. One is that it provides real protection for your family. So if, like me, and I think a lot of people, you think that the price of Bitcoin is going to go up over time. You think Bitcoin will be more valuable in the future. You're if you have a HODL mentality, literally an intergenerational wealth transfer mentality around at least some portion of your Bitcoin, this is literally a way to instantiate that and think about, it would be terrible if you died tomorrow and you got the payout, but even if you died in 50 years, your family would, or whomever your loved ones would get this payout that would probably be able to purchase more things in the future than I can purchase now. And the second thing is that life insurance, and this is all life insurance, not just our product, in most places, but for our first product in the United States in particular, has a very privileged tax position. So the value in the policy is accumulating tax-free. You can, I think one of the big benefits that people look at is, and again, this is true of all whole life policies, not particular to our product, you can take a policy loan against the product. So you can think that there's a savings account. I shouldn't quite say it that way, but there's a value that's accumulating in the policy over time, and you can borrow out of it tax-free. But what's nice about that loan is that it's like you're getting a new Bitcoin. That's what the tax-free element means. So if Bitcoin was at 38,000 now, but it was at 380,000 in 10 years, or it was at 3.8 million, you could, if you needed liquidity from the policy, you could borrow 1 Bitcoin back from us. And then it's like you're getting a new tax basis Bitcoin. And you don't actually have to pay the loan back because it's netted against the death benefit at the end of the year. So I think that, again, the like long-term vision of just like tons of people who that we think globally should want to and will transact in Bitcoin, and all the way to like what Meanwhile is now, which is a Bermuda-based life insurer that's selling whole life insurance to folks.
Super, super cool. Okay. I find this fascinating and I have so many questions, but I think one of my earliest questions here might be about the user personas or archetypes. Like, what did they look like for Meanwhile, maybe right now, and maybe your predictions for how that might change over time? Like, are there commonalities between people who find Meanwhile attractive right now? And I'm just curious what you've learned about those people.
Yeah, I like to joke. Right now, we have a minimum of like 1 or 2 Bitcoin paid over 10 years, right? So let's even just take one Bitcoin. You split that into 10 payments. It's $3,000 or $3,800 a year, and then $38,000 over 10 years. Like, so our persona right now, or we have 2 personas, and I'd say one is like crypto native or Bitcoin native. So that could be all the way up to whales. But I would say that these are people who like probably like they define their wealth or they think of themselves in just from a crypto perspective, probably the listeners of this podcast, right? So, and then they demographically, they both personas look the same. They're primarily male. They're in their 20s, 30s, and 40s. Most, but not all, of the people are like getting married, recently married, have young kids. So it's like sort of like prime life insurance thinking. But anyway, this first population is quite like crypto focused and crypto native, and then they probably have a lot of the questions that you have, which is like, who's your custodian? Okay, I give you 10, you promise me 18. Like, how are you getting that yield? Like, what does that mean? Like, there's a lot of like, how do I make sure this isn't a rug pull or a Ponzi scheme, right? There's a lot of just like moral like stuff.
Yeah, sure.
And then the other persona, again, demographically, tends to be men in their 20s, 30s, and 40s. Again, not all men, but mostly. But I would say it's like they're I don't want to say necessarily rich, but they have another profession and then they have some crypto. So this is people, sometimes it's in tech, sometimes it's finance folks. It's not, like we have some customers who like talking to one of our customers like owns a construction company, and like so they didn't like they're not like working in crypto. They didn't create all their wealth in crypto, but they believe in crypto a little, somewhat. You know, they might have like 2, 5, 10 Bitcoin, and they are thinking a lot more about, you know, they're not maybe ideologically all about hodling, but like that's why they have the Bitcoin. It's almost like an insurance, well, maybe I shouldn't say, but it's like protection of, well, if Bitcoin does become the most important thing in the world, I should have a few. Or I think Bitcoin was a really important technological advance, so I want to buy some for my kids. Various political beliefs, left or right, about the United States and why that should lead people to buy crypto. So this persona asks actually a lot fewer questions about like the yield or custody, although there tends to be some questions about those. And then there's much more like maybe a classic fintech sale, like why does this product make sense? Like, what happens if the company shuts down? Explain those tax benefits to me again. Like, how does this fit into my existing estate plan? Whereas the first persona like might not even have a will or trust or anything. Yeah, so those are like the 2 sets of personas we see.
Yeah, fascinating. So another thing I want to ask about, since you do seem to toggle a little bit between saying Bitcoin and crypto more broadly, I'm a little curious how that focus on Bitcoin came to be, and maybe what that conversation sounded like from within Meanwhile about if there are conversations about other cryptocurrencies or tokens besides Bitcoin. How have you guys thought about that process?
Yeah, so I would say that we definitely think there's a real alignment between like the culture of Bitcoin and store of value and long-term value and hodling and life insurance. And I would say that as a company, we are right now exclusively Bitcoin focused. And yeah, so that's where we are now. But I would say that we're not. There's definitely lots of complex beliefs and ideologies
Sure.
and
Yeah.
perspectives, and I think for us, although we're not focused on other coins or tokens, I think Ethereum in particular, I think it'd be hard to say at this point that it's not going to also be a durable part of the ecosystem. I think it might do something different. That is, I see Bitcoin more as itself a store of value, and I see Ethereum more as a like window into computation and DeFi and things like that. So I think we could see potentially creating another company that is like a peer company that does ETH stuff. And similarly, like random match book, right? So you'd pay us in ETH, you'd take payouts in ETH. But then the product the company sold would probably be like different. I think that's a little far off. So I toggle between those things, partially like just in recognition of who the audience is, but also just partially because although I believe that, again, when we look out 50 years, the largest part of crypto land will be BTC land. I don't think it will be the only thing that exists.
Yeah. I think
beyond that, I think it's actually, sorry to interrupt you, but beyond that, I think it's quite difficult for us to imagine. Like, I don't, like, we have to see how things evolve. Like, I don't know. There isn't like XRP life insurance company or Solana life insurance company. Like,
right.
I think those tokens or coins are really interesting and have real utility, but I think it's less clear how they would fit into a life insurance company.
Yeah. Yeah. That's super interesting. So I'm curious, with the time we have here, I want to maybe zoom out a tiny bit. And one thing I was thinking about as you mentioned this, like this more like nation metaphor, or like these crypto land, BTC land, et cetera. I'm curious about, how do you think about really like differentiation in the context of really, because you guys have this interesting first mover advantage that is, I think my question is like, how long do you foresee that lasting before maybe a Cambrian explosion of other types of firms, or how early do you feel like you are based on the conversations you're having? And I guess where do you feel like things are going timeline wise? I don't know if that makes sense, but.
No, I do think it makes sense. I think there are other folks who have definitely thought about like Bitcoin and life insurance, or crypto and life insurance. I'll just say Bitcoin and life insurance. I think we are unique in the like lengths that we've gone to make that a reality, and that like we've built a full carrier. I joke sometimes that I feel like I'm running an anti-money laundering firm with a thin veneer of life insurance on top, right? Like we've had to build like KYC systems, anti-money laundering systems. Like we do tons of like actuarial math and solvency calculations. And I have an independent board in Bermuda and enterprise risk management framework. And like, it is like not easy to run a carrier. On the flip side, I think it's not easy to reconceptualize whole businesses. So, we don't really worry about incumbent life insurers forming a Bitcoin subsidiary in Bermuda. I think we find it more likely that they would partner with us, maybe on bringing products to market or something like that. And then on the other hand, all the way back to like this core belief of regulated financial services, I think that's a real differentiation, we think, with a lot of, or at least some other people in crypto. And we've developed a lot of life insurance expertise at this point. So I don't know. I haven't heard of a lot of anyone else working on it. I think we'll have a few years, probably, maybe even more, of being the only one, because it's just like, it's hard. It's not easy to start a life insurance company. Like we have all the problems of a crypto company and all the problems of a life insurance company.
Yeah.
Having said that, like, there'll obviously eventually be, like, there are a lot of life insurers in the US. And even if you look at most countries in the world, even smaller countries, there tends to be like 3, 4, 5 life insurers. I think we're of the perspective that we want to build a large, durable business, an important company for BTC land. And then we think that will mean for the world. And there'll eventually be competition, and we'll win in all the ways that you usually win, you know?
Yeah. Super interesting. So I feel like, I mean, we could have talked probably for 2 hours about the regulatory part. We probably could have talked a lot more about sort of your thoughts on the investing part of deploying capital over time. But I think here,
the only thing I'll say there that's just important to note is, and it sounds crazy, but like life insurance is a very conservative business. So we lend Bitcoin to other people. It's like we run like a private credit operation in Bitcoin, and we have never had a credit loss over the course of running this company. And that includes like BlockFi blew up and Voyager and 3AC and FTX. Like we've never had a credit loss. And part of the reason that is like we're like, it's like a low yield, low risk. Like we're trying to get like 3.5% returns in Bitcoin terms. And although I think that is not easy to do, and it is something we spend a lot of time on, it is not like trying to get 7% or 17% returns, right? Like we have a lot of, again, an independent board and risk management procedures and investment committee, all this stuff to make sure we don't take on undue risk. And I think that's really important for policyholders to know, that there's a lot of double clicking you can do on this, but it's just like fundamentally a different business than I think some of these companies that were running last year that were lending like crazy to as many people as they could at high rates and like promising people that they could pull out their money. And in a moment's notice, like people, that's like just a different thing. Like we are very like slow, steady, conservative returns. And that's what we're promising our policyholders. And that's what we deliver.
Love it. Okay. And I totally think that's worth mentioning, because it's something that unfortunately has to be said, right? Like it's a key differentiator.
I guess I should say, I like to think it goes without mentioning, but we keep our customer funds separate from our corporate funds.
That's great. So maybe 2 last questions here for you. I think my first question is, beginning of this journey with Meanwhile, I'm curious if you could go back and impart some advice to yourself from your more seasoned position now. What's maybe 1 or 2 things you would want to impart to that younger version of yourself that would have been valuable to know starting this journey?
Raise more money before June 2022. No. That is the advice I would probably like literally give myself. Things were crazy, but we've done pretty well for ourselves. I think that, what's the advice I would give myself when I started this business? I think for us, there's a lot of like tactical nuance in, we have been very deliberate and a little slower than we could have otherwise been, I think. And at every moment of time, that was the right choice to make, because it has led us to like having a better relationship with our regulator and like being more buttoned up, more conservative. But, we spent about a year to get licensed, and we spent that's like 2022, you could think. And then we took like most of this year to like get operationalized. That is like do all the KYC, AML, reserving, actuarial math, blah, blah, blah. We probably could have shaved a few months off of that if we pushed as hard as we could, but we made a bunch of choices to like, I think, be even more deliberate than we needed to be. So I'm not sure what the actual piece of advice there is. Like maybe Reid Hoffman's old advice that if you're not embarrassed by your first product, you spent too much time on it. We probably spent a little too much time before we launched. And having said that, I wake up every day saying like, how can we move faster? So it's not, I don't know. Now I probably would have told myself to read some life insurance textbooks on actuarial modeling work a little earlier too.
Yeah, I hear you. Well, Zach, what is your team working on right now, and what's the best way for people to follow along on the journey?
Yeah, so really we're just cranking now. We have some additional product design work we're doing to launch some new products next year, but right now we're really just talking to people one-on-one about life insurance. It's a big decision. It's a complicated product. Like I jump on the phone like literally every single person who wants to buy the product. And then the second thing is we're working a little bit on, we're getting, as I mentioned, steady, call it 3% returns in Bitcoin and a low what we think is a low risk, low yield way. And that's actually itself like a product that could be interesting to people that doesn't exist in the world. So we're thinking about launching that as like a parallel asset management product. And so we're working a little bit on that. And how people can learn more is, honestly, as I said, I talk to every single person who wants to buy a policy. So people can go to the website, which is meanwhile.bm, and they can sign up, they can answer some questions, and literally you'll get an email from me saying we should talk. Or, I'm on Twitter, or my email is Zach, Z-A-C, at meanwhile.bm. I'm always happy to talk to customers or hear interesting feedback from folks.
Very cool. Zach, thank you so much for the time. I think so much interesting insight here, and super interested to follow along the journey myself. So really grateful for the time, and have a great rest of your week here.
Great. Thanks so much, Tanner. I really appreciate the time and the really excellent questions.
Awesome. Have a good day. Bye-bye. Hey, everybody. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the episode, go ahead and maybe give us a good 5-star rating and subscribe wherever you're getting your podcasts so you can get all the latest conversations with the most interesting crypto founders, investors, and builders from across the world. Thanks so much. Have a good one.